Mark Sommer. Good to have you here. How are you?
Great, Eric. Thanks for having me. Appreciate the opportunity to talk with you, and yeah, we'll have some fun.
Yeah, we definitely will. We definitely will. I just it's been the last couple of weeks, just nipping up before Christmas and stuff like that. Well, number one, I can't believe we got here to the end of the year.
Yeah.
How did that even happen?
It's amazing that I've been thinking, because it was at this point 11 and a half months ago that I went into business for myself. And
Right.
yeah, so it's been a really interesting year one.
Yeah, exactly. Which we're going to talk through a little bit when we get to it, and get to unpack it and all of that. And we've got lots to talk about, lots of really cool stuff. So Sommer Energy Technology is the focus right now. Do you want to just give us the 30-second elevator speech of what Sommer Energy Technology is all about?
Sure. So what we really do is we have a pretty tight focus on gas compression. Mm-hmm. And then even more so in the realm of compression is the engine side of that package. So really our keywords are safety, optimization, reliability. And so to work with operators and help them take these machines that they have that are truly great and keep them great and potentially make them better.
Cool. That was a good 30-second elevator speech. That would work. Ding, we've just arrived at the floor. That was perfect. Absolutely Excellent. Great. So this fascination with all things mechanical and how things work and all that. Let's jump in the time machine, hit the button, and go back to the probably by the time, because we're about the same age, right? I know You're considerably older than me, but yeah,
I got 2 months on you.
So round about the kind of early 80s, you're beginning to find yourself as a young adult. So where did you grow up? What was school like? What was growing up like, being a kid?
So I grew up just outside of Pittsburgh. I had a Pittsburgh address in a small place called Brentwood, right on the city border. And we're relatively small. I think we had 110, 115 kids that I graduated with. And it was a really interesting place to grow up in that we were, it was a urban neighborhood. It was kind of the beginning of the suburbs, but it was a very old borough. But at the same time, there were there's lots of hills and valleys. And so a very large amount of undeveloped land, some in Brentwood and some in neighboring townships. So we actually had woods that we could run around in, that we could shoot BB guns, ride dirt bikes, build BMX jumps. But we were right essentially in the city. I was 3/4 of a mile from the Pittsburgh city limit. So it's pretty interesting.
Thinking back, I mean, all right, we grew up in different parts of the world completely, but we were kids at exactly the same time, doing exactly in woods, doing exactly the same crazy things. How high can we get these bikes in the air? How far can we get them off a jump and stuff like that? When you think back, maybe you've got a slightly different level on this, but I don't see kids doing what we did back then. I don't see kids doing that.
Not to the same extent by any means. I can say, so my youngest is 16 and he is still on 2 wheels all the time.
Right.
He has a YouTube channel. He released a YouTube video of he and his friend. They basically built jumps out of the snow that hit us a week or so ago, and they just don't stop. But they are the outliers for sure.
Yeah, big time. So growing up was all in the woods, Brentwood, dirt bikes, jumps, taking things apart and all of that. And then where was the point where this mechanical fascination hit? And it took hold?
So I would say I point to the summer of 1985 is really where things came together, and my path has been cemented from that point. So I really enjoyed drafting and mechanical design classes that I was taking, and it would mess around with some things in the garage at home. My dad we had some old trucks that we would tinker around with, take off the stock exhaust and put headers on and change the clutches and so forth. But then for me, it was really in 1985, I had been into BMX for a couple of years, and I started racing that year. So I was on my BMX bike all day, but then I'd race it once a week. So you had to tune it up as a race bike, but I was riding it all day and jumping over curves and in the woods. So it was a lot of work to keep after, but I really enjoyed it. And then also that year, if you see a poster behind me, that's the great Scotsman, Jim Clark.
Jim Clark.
So my dad began a fascination with racing in 1965 when he went to Indianapolis to see the great Jim Clark drive.
Wow.
In 1985, then I was at the age of 14, and the things that I liked, my dad thought, well, I haven't been there in 20 years. I think you'd enjoy it. Let's go. And I was hooked into racing. I mean, my eyes just lit up the first time I saw and heard those cars. It was amazing. It was qualifying weekend. And at that time, there was 60-ish cars trying to make that field of 33.
My goodness.
So it was a different time. And then later that summer, I progressed, and I still ride bicycles constantly now. But the motorcycles started, and I started off with this 12-year-old 1973 Suzuki TC100 that required a lot of work to keep that thing running. And I enjoyed not just doing the work of fumbling around, but I would buy the climber manual, if you remember those, and I wanted to understand how these things worked. And so that's really what got me started on the mechanical fascination. And it just grew from there and kept building and building. And then when it was time to go to college, I continued on that mechanical.
So that was a no-brainer. You were going to follow an educational route into what this was all about, in that kind of channel, right?
Correct. Yeah. And that's why I went to school for mechanical engineering technology, not mechanical engineering, because the engineering technology programs were very real world, lab focused, not so much theoretical. So you generally, someone who comes out of an engineering technology program is not someone who's really equipped to design something from the ground up, but it's really like getting a degree in application engineering, that you're learning how to, using sound engineering principles, taking these devices, these components that exist, and integrating them into a solution. So that's what I still do to this day, and I love it.
Outstanding. Now, when you were at college, you decided to also top up. Not that the mechanical engineering and technology course was too easy by any means. I'm guessing it was a bit of a challenge, but you decided to do some business work there too, right?
Yeah, that's right. So I've always had this entrepreneurial side. I grew up in a house of entrepreneurs. Both my mother and father have their own businesses that are different businesses. My father is a real estate appraiser, and my mother had a business writing business where she would write company newsletters. My wife grew up in a household of entrepreneurs. She never knew her father to go to work and have a paycheck. He had two businesses that he built from the ground up and were successful. My wife is self-employed. So coming back to, I just thought this was a kind of a normal thing to do. But when I got out of college, that just wasn't in the cards to try to go into business for yourself. So what's interesting, where I sit now, this is Industrial Boulevard in Bethel Park, Pennsylvania. And my first job out of college was a 5-minute walk from where I am. They are no longer there. There's another company, but it's interesting. So that was in April of 1994. And in May of 2020, I moved into this location. So it's kind of come full circle. But the goal for a very, very long time was to work for myself. And the reason is that I have a vision that a lot of times doesn't necessarily align with a big brand type of company. But at the same time, there is value to working with these big brands because it gives you the opportunity to learn a business to be responsible for profit and loss, to understand, what can be a lot of times a complex pursuit, that there's some systems, some strategy. So there is a lot of value, but then I was at a point where I felt like the time is right. And I figured out a way to go into business for myself that wouldn't be capital intensive. I wouldn't have to borrow money. I wouldn't have to bring on investors. And that was what I do now. So I'm a manufacturer's representative. So there are a half dozen companies for whom I provide representation in my corner of the world. We'll call it the Appalachian Basin oil and gas market, focused on compression. And they are all allied complementary product lines. And I can say that I have an absolutely awesome team behind me with these manufacturers who I represent. It's not just me. I've got at each of the half dozen different companies, a full team supporting my efforts and supporting our customers. So it took a while to get things figured out, but this is how I figured out how I could do it.
No, it's cool. I love it. You mentioned your mother was a writer. Did that have any impact on you growing up and how you present yourself today, even?
Yeah, absolutely. So the grammar, spoken, and the written word were very, very important to my mother, and she emphasized that with us. So she really would work with us on writing. She had her own office about the size of my little place, an Apple Macintosh, and she encouraged me to learn to type, which I never really learned, but I still hunt and peck. But the writing was very important. So any paper that I would write for school, by no means was she doing it for me, but she was my editor. And it wasn't she wouldn't scratch things out and say replaces. She would take me through it and help me with that. So, and then as in college, I had my final English class was a technical writing class. And I felt that the lessons that my mother had been helping me with all along. And then when I had, remember her name was Betty Lou Waters, professor of the technical writing class. I felt like it was all coming together because now I was writing about these things that I wanted to do. And it was writing a technical manual, maybe, for a product. And we had to write a user's manual, a maintenance manual, et cetera. And so I just felt that all come together. And at the same time, I started to read, and there's lots of people who've heard this from me before. One of my, he's a true maverick, and one of my heroes is John DeLorean.
Right.
And when the first book that I read, because I wanted to read a book, was On a Clear Day, You Can See General Motors, written by John DeLorean. I bought that book at a half-price bookstore in 1990. So I was 19 going on 20. And that was the first book I ever read on my own. And that's wheels started turning with, I thought I knew what engineering is, and I thought I knew what business was. And I just thought, these are things that are in silos. And then I saw, so John DeLorean, this brilliant engineer, an entrepreneur, a maverick, maybe not a great business manager by any means.
Maybe not, right?
But it opened my eyes. So there was this combination of business and engineering, and the twain shall meet, as they say.
Yeah.
And then, and my grandfather on my mother's side was a big Lee Iacocca fan. And I read Lee Iacocca's book around that same time. And it was interesting that Lee Iacocca went to Lehigh University, great school in Pennsylvania, pretty much Ivy League for mechanical engineering. And then in a program with Ford, it was a university that they owned, master's degree in I think it was vehicle propulsion system. And anyway, basically it was on drivetrain.
Yeah.
And it was interesting in that book that Lee Iacocca, so he came out of this Ford sponsored master's degree program. And his first job was to design new clutch springs for a new transmission. And so he was 2 weeks into designing these clutch springs from a blank sheet of paper. And he saw at the other end of the hallway was the Ford corporate sales team. And he thought those guys were having a lot more fun. Right. So he went to his boss and said, you know what? I don't think I want to be an engineer anymore. I want to be an engineer, but I don't want to perform engineering work. And look, I'd like to transfer to sales. And that was, yeah.
I'd like to eventually go to Italy and speak to Enzo Ferrari and people like that.
Yeah. So it's so those two guys, you know, John Delory and Lee Iacocca opened up the world to me that, okay, it's good to have this technical background and this business background. And, you know, because both of those things are definitely of interest to me.
But you didn't mess about, did you? I mean, you came straight out of, I'm wondering if you were reading that book whilst you were at college, because you do Yeah, you must have been, right. So mechanical engineering and technology, and this is by no means a criticism, it's just an observation. Most people who do mechanical engineering technology would come out and look for a role in mechanical engineering technology. Now you do, but you go into sales.
Yeah,
right? So almost straight away. Why?
Okay, so when I was taking, I mentioned the lab classes in mechanical engineering technology. So we had machine design 1, machine design 2, and I remember I got that book and I was so excited. I still have that book because on the front cover was the front end of a motorcycle. And I thought, oh boy, we're going to learn how to make disc brakes and suspension. So anyway, the professor, his name was Mr. Reuben Ward, and he was a great guy. He came from industry. He worked for Union Carbide for quite a long time and then kind of retired into teaching. So he was a true window to the world for me as well, because he was not a theoretical guy. He was a hands-on. He was doing the work that he was teaching us in a chemical processing facility. So, conveyor belts, pumps, drives, compressors, etc. So in machine design class, we had a 3-hour lab once a week. And lots of times Mr. Ward would start, we would maybe for 20 or 30 minutes, he'd put in a VHS tape of some product. And they would like, I remember fault couplings, for example, he would show us a lot. And the way it was depicted that there was the friendly Falk sales engineer who is ready to come to your facility and help you with your problems. And sales wasn't really on the radar, but those videotapes and just, you know, my background too, as a young guy, I started a paper route when I was 11 going on 12, and I kept that until I was 17. And I was cutting grass for people, and I had a job at a pizza shop, and I was also doing some welding and fabricating work, making motorcycle stands and weightlifting benches. And I just really enjoyed that variety. And as it was closer to finishing school, I didn't see myself as someone who could go to the same office every day and do the same thing every day. Very much like Lee Iacocca, I don't see a lifetime of designing clutch springs for me. So I went into sales, and the way I did it was I worked inside as an application engineer for the company who I mentioned right down the street, and they moved me into an outside sales role. And it was a good start for me. And then I wanted to move into the world of controls, and realizing the sophistication of the controls world, I wasn't ready for an outside sales. So I actually sought out inside application engineers.
Right.
Roles. So I did that, and it's been great. And I can say there's lots of folks who I've learned from along the way. And that inside application engineering role that I had, I was supporting 2 outside sales reps, and these guys were both excellent.
Yeah.
So this would have been in the late 90s. And, you know, these guys, they were in their 40s. At that time, they had some time under their belt, and they were just great. And they could keep the phone ringing. And at the same time, then I developed a good telephone rapport with lots of our customers, and we were solving problems together over the phone, et cetera. So in a lot of ways, I think back to what I did at that point, 20 plus years ago, to the way things are now, where you're a little bit chained down to the desk because of
Yep.
COVID. So I feel like those skills that I developed as a sales application engineer in the 90s to early 2000s are still with me and serving me well in the current circumstances.
No, I love that. I love that. And I also love the fact that I'm a firm believer. My life in sales, you make observations, and life in general management, you make observations about what works best and what doesn't work so well, and you gather those with you and you put them in your knapsack and you pick them up through life. And I just love the fact that you've got your education in mechanical engineering and technology. You've got all your background in what you do, and you're able to, when you go into a potential sales environment, you're able to sit there and engage and have a conversation with the client. You're able to completely speak to them on their level, understand what their needs are, and sit there and work out the best solution rather than just, here's a brochure, contact me.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. We've had a bit of a laugh about this. And we're criticizing, but it's only to try and make people see another way and another method of doing this. But yeah, the very complex, contact me for nuclear exhaust waste manufacturing and things like that. Contact me for a brochure. It's just such a waste for the individual and for the people that they're trying to attract, right?
Yes.
But yeah, if you can sit down there, what a pleasure for a client who's interested in that space, who gets put with someone like you with your kind of background. Immediately you're just talking together as peers, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, very powerful.
Yeah, and so people buy from people.
Yeah.
And I want my people to have a great outcome from what we work on together. And the reason, what drives me to that is I'm a nerd when it comes to machinery of just about any type. And so I almost feel like it's a hobby. For what is my job is also the same things that I do in my own time. It's just the machines where I make a living are larger and there's greater dollars tied to their performance, et cetera. But I love it all. And so it makes it easy and it makes it a pleasure.
Outstanding. So you pretty much worked for quite a long time with a larger company, but then you came to the point where you set up on your own and you're out now representing organizations. What did the difference feel like for you taking that jump to go ahead and set up Sommer?
So it was a little bit scary, but a little bit not in that. So there was a couple of companies that I had some things worked out with to get started. And the biggest part is trusting the process. So I've developed a process over the years, and there's not a checklist, there's not a conversation, there's not a boxes to check, steps 1, 2, 3, but there's a process that has been proven to be successful and repeatable. So with that, I had the total faith in myself, because if you don't have that, I'm sure when you have gone on your own too, because it's just that I've done this for others. Yeah. Now I'm going to do it for myself. Yep. And the other, I have to give a shout out to my wife, Audra, because when I came to her and I said, I really think I'm going to do it. I'm going to go into business for myself. I'm going to start getting this set up. Her response to that was not, well, what about our benefits? Etc. Her response was, I'm so glad that this day finally came.
Wow.
Yeah. So 100% supportive.
Outstanding. And I can resonate with that because I have my Audra is Sarah, and Sarah is the rock and the anchor.
Yeah.
For the whole thing. How can I help was her only response. Just absolutely awesome. Fantastic. So the reason that we know each other, the reason that we're here on this call together is because we have met and come together and formed a relationship in the modern way. That's just the way it happens nowadays.
Right.
So we met on social media. We met on LinkedIn through content and stuff like that. We hooked up, we connected, and we've kind of shared experiences, and we've shared some stories, and we're actually both big fans of LinkedIn stories, which is some people are into, some people are not, but we're both seeing some benefits in that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think with the LinkedIn stories that it allows you to open up the personal side of yourself a bit, but it's still tied to the business.
Yeah.
If that makes, so that's, it kind of put myself out there in a way that is business related, but still personal.
Yeah. But I also love the fact that you're, if you don't mind me saying, you're, as I say, considerably older than me. You're in your 50s now. I'm just going to use the term 50s. You're in your 50s.
Fair enough.
You're 2 months into your 50s.
Yeah.
But you come from that deep mechanical engineering background. You've come through a fairly traditional kind of sales route, but you've also looked, and I think this is probably testament to your training and maybe even your life growing up, but you've seen that there's a change in how things are being done, and you've adapted to that. So you are now finding benefit in being social in what you do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the world has changed. It gets used a lot now. There's probably 5 to maybe 10 years of change has happened in the last 12 months.
Yep.
And things are not going back. I mean, business travel is never going to go back to the way it was. So we have to adapt and do things differently and connect. So yeah, I think in the world that we're in, don't be afraid to let the world know who you are. Mm-hmm. And they don't need to know everything about you, but yeah, but I would say to your listeners, viewers, don't be afraid to open up a bit.
Yeah. You've seen good benefit in that this year, right? You're actually seeing like tangible benefits in just opening up a bit, just being more present and sharing more about what you're interested in, rather than here's a brochure, contact me. Sorry, it just makes me laugh whenever I say it.
Yeah. So I mean, in addition to the customers and prospective customers who, I can tell there in some cases where the relationship has moved on a bit faster. Maybe these things that we would talk about over lunch, we're end up talking about on LinkedIn. And then also with, it's all for the manufacturers for whom I provide representation. The fact that I might not be able to be on the road 5 days a week. I'm generally on the road 2 or 3 nowadays. And still a lot of times the meetings are off site.
Yeah.
That I've had a couple of instances where there are folks who I'm working with, they come to me, right, because their office is closed. Yes. They're welcome to, and we can't meet in their living room. So they come to my office, and we have some other venues that we use, but but the digital presence, it's important to the manufacturers, again, for whom I provide representation, because they are all very forward thinking organizations. And I should say led by some great forward thinkers. Yep. And they are increasing their digital presence across all social media platforms.
Awesome. Now, I have a question for you, which is either going to really, I haven't tested this question. I don't know where it's going to go. It might be the end of the interview. You might storm off. You might slam the door. We'll see.
Yeah.
With your background and with all the stuff that's plastered on the walls behind you, and the fact that I get the feeling that if you were to take your hands at any point, they probably smell of petrol at some point.
That's true.
During the day. What's your feelings on this massive revolution in electric vehicles?
So I will reference another LinkedIn connection who has become somewhat of a friend.
Right.
Dr. Peter Kelly-Senecal.
Cool.
He is a brilliant CFD engineer, owns a company that does combustion modeling. He is a combustion genius. He uses the hashtag, "the future is eclectic."
Ah.
So for me, there is a mix that makes sense. To go all electric, and I think the general public doesn't understand the infrastructure required to actually do that. And then, of course, there is nothing is free. The environmental toll of the mining of the metals for batteries. So I do believe in. I have 0.0 issue with hybridization and also vehicles that have specific purposes. Now, what I don't want to be taken away from me is that poster on the wall behind me is a 1982 Honda CB750F that Freddie Spencer rode to the AMA Superbike Championship. I have a 1980 that looks just like it that I'm in the middle of restoring. I don't want the ability for me to roll around on my 40-year-old Honda to be taken away. And it was Jerry Seinfeld and Jay Leno. It was one of the comedians getting coffee and comedians in cars getting coffee.
Yep.
That they talked about where cars are going to go in the future. And they feel like the internal combustion engine cars and motorcycles at one point, maybe 100 years from now, will be like horses. Yeah. It's something that you have for fun and enjoyment. Yeah. So I have no issue. I am a total gearhead, petrol head. I want to see race cars run on internal combustion engines. And if that's liquid hydrogen, okay.
Cool.
No problem.
Oh, phew. I wondered how that was going to go. That was a bit of a risk, that question.
But the vehicle that I drive I drive a Jeep Grand Cherokee. And if that was an electric vehicle, I'd have no problem with it because I look at that as very utilitarian. So that's where I kind of drop when it comes to vehicles. Is it utilitarian or is it recreational? So I don't want that recreational option taken from me. But on the utilitarian side, no issue with electric vehicles.
Cool. Now, on the vehicle side of things, we have to discuss your, do we call it a hobby or your formal position as marshal? Tell us what you do, the joy that you have of being able to do in your, let's call it a hobby, but you can correct me on what it actually is.
Oh, it is absolutely a hobby. So when I was in college, I actually looked into, it was called the Russell Racing School towards the end of my college career. And they had a open wheel mechanic program that you'd spend a year at the Laguna Seca racetrack.
Nice.
Looking after their cars that they had as part of the Jim Russell Racing School, and lots of open wheel drivers went through that program. So there was a bit of driving so you can understand being a driver. And my goal was, okay, go through, I have my engineering degree, my business degree. I'll do this open wheel car deal for a year. And then I'm going to go be a mechanic at an IndyCar team. And then I will move into a race engineer position, or probably a data engineer first, and then a race engineer. So I'd run a car, and then I would run the whole team. So I thought by this age, I would be the team principal. So when I went in business for myself, I could give myself any position that I wanted. So
you thought you'd be standing in the pit with these on, looking at a computer and telling guys what's going on, right?
Correct. So I thought I would be team principal. So there's no regrets, and I wouldn't change anything that I do for a minute, but I had the opportunity. I looked into it a couple years ago, and I forget how I found the program, but as I mentioned, I started going to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in 1985, and that has stuck with me. I haven't gone every year, and I am just a fanatic when it comes to motorsports. So I went through some classes and with USAC, United States Auto Club, and I went through the flag, so the race course official pit and paddock. So long story short, I made my debut, I guess you could call it, in May of 2019 as a pit and paddock marshal at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. So it was just really amazing, and in that time I've gotten to meet lots of great people, and it's something that I love. And I received just yesterday an email for this year's coming schedule. So I've got March 27th blocked off to go to Mid-Ohio for the Mid-Ohio up there, and then April 10th and 11th, Indianapolis for the course marshal class there again. So
you can just imagine them radioing down to you, Mark. Your smile is blinding the drivers.
that is a real possibility.
Chisel the grin off your face. My God,
yeah.
No, that is spectacular. Hey, listen, it's been I guess all the social channels are full of how tough a year it's been for everyone. Yes, it's been a horrendous, tough year. People have died, businesses have suffered, everyone's mental health suffered. What are your hopes for 21?
Okay, for me, I see that our business is really, there should be not a ramp up, but it will be a massive step. Right. Because the folks who I deal with, because of budgets being cut, lack of personnel, and even most of the compression operators, they use third-party service companies to do their heavy overhaul work. And they're also not allowing them on site. So between budgets and personnel restrictions, et cetera, there's lots of work that has been put off. But at the same time, I've been very busy ramping up to that. So yeah, there's lots of good things in the works that I see with the companies for whom I provide representation, that we are all very excited about 2021. And we are all prepared to be overwhelmed, which will be really great.
No, that is very cool. And what about from a sort of wider, any sort of, when you get to our age, you do a bit of reflecting on maybe you view things that have happened in the world slightly differently from when you did when you were 21 or whatever. But
yeah,
is there anything about this year that's had an effect on you that you hope continues or grows? Either in communities or in the industries or just even within friends and family.
Yeah, I guess, the biggest thing would be the adaptability that you have to be able to have to get through situations. And if I'll just stay on the business side, I hear lots of folks saying, well, no one's spending any money right now. I don't know what to do. Well, you have to figure something out to be prepared for the change that will happen. And to that, I would say anyone that says they're not doing much because no one's spending any money, businesses have to spend money. If they don't spend money, they're not in business.
Correct.
You and I are both self-employed, and I'm sure you do too. I keep track of my monthly expenses. So I am if I'm not spending any money, that means I don't have a business.
No.
So the market that we serve, machines are still running. So there are still opportunities there. So it's creating the work for yourself that's not just going to get thrown over the fence to you. So just having that resiliency is something really important. Resiliency, adaptability.
Wow. Strong words. What are the plans over the holiday break? Are you having a holiday? Are you going to take any time off between Christmas and New Year or over the break?
So we actually, our Christmas starts tonight with my 3 sons. 2 of them, the 2 older ones, have girlfriends. So we have our Christmas tonight, and then we have Christmas essentially until Saturday. So our Christmas will go from the 23rd to the 26th to get all the family in at different times and in different places. And then as far as that week between, I will be working. There's actually some online coursework that I have put aside that to do just that next week. So I'm doing some online coursework, and my wife is actually joining me in one of them as well because it's pertinent to her business. So it's so that's kind of the plan. I will probably stop in this place a couple times just because that's what I do. And it's funny that I really need to have this office that's not in my home, because I feel like, I told you I grew up in a very blue collar neighborhood, and blue collar neighborhood in a very blue collar city, that you punch a time clock, you go to work and you work. And
that's so funny. Sarah, my wife, says, she tries to beat that out of me all the time, because I'm like, I actually miss the office. I like the rigor of getting up in the morning, going to the office and being there and coming home. I like that kind of, but that's bred into me, right?
Yeah, right. And the other thing that's enjoyable for me here is that this building, there's about a half dozen or so tenants, and we are all independent business owners, all in very different fields.
Right.
But I kind of have office mates. I kind of have coworkers that, we talk at the water fountain, or we at the mailbox. And so I have some really great guys who we have some enjoyable conversations here and there in the building. So, yeah.
No, superb. Right. I'm going to ask you a really awful question for you, and it's just our closing question. Just to sum this all up, if I could click my fingers and deliver outside your office right now any factory perfect condition model car and motorcycle, what are you having? I know that's just a nightmare, and you're only allowed one of each.
Boy, okay.
And you've got 30 seconds to tell me. I'm really sorry.
Does the car have to be street legal?
No, it's okay. just the way it came out of the factory from any time period in history.
So we'll take. I'm looking at it right now. You can't. The 1988 McLaren Honda that Ayrton Senna drove.
Ooh, right. Okay. Yes.
That would. Talking. And then, as far as the motorcycle,
so you've really put the family first in this decision, haven't you?
Yeah, I would take the McLaren to our local track called Pit Race for track days. Awesome. Yeah, I don't think I could fit in the cockpit though. I'm 6'1".
No chance. And the motorcycle?
The motorcycle. That is a difficult decision. Probably what would there are so okay. 1986 Suzuki GSXR 750 LTD.
Just off the top of your head.
Yeah.
And on that bombshell, we will call it a day. Thank you so much for spending time with us, Mark.
Okay.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Eric.
It's been brilliant, and we will catch up with you. This will go out on the 27th, so you'll have had all the Christmases for the family that you had planned. And let's stay in touch in the new year and just make this social bond even stronger, right?
Absolutely.
All right, man. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.